Let's look at a map of world shipping before 1869. This animated globe shows the old nautical route from Europe to Asia, which required ships to sail all the way around the African continent. The opening of the Suez Canal, a 100-mile man-made waterway carved through the Egyptian desert, shaved 5,000 miles off that voyage. The British government actually opposed the canal at first, seeing it as a strategic threat, but they quickly realized its immense value. By 1875, London bought a massive 44% stake in the operating company to secure their vital link to eastern colonies like India. As this data highlights, a staggering 80% of all ships passing through the waterway were British. That convenience came at an immense human cost. The canal's 10-year construction, overseen by French diplomat Ferdinand de Lesseps, cost the lives of many thousands of Egyptian laborers. Yet the resulting waterway was run entirely by a private company owned by European shareholders. For the British establishment, maintaining authority over this specific stretch of desert water was a non-negotiable reality. It was the physical artery that allowed their empire to function and project military power across the globe. But the political reality following World War II was rapidly shifting. The British Empire was in steady retreat, bleeding territory and influence as nations like India and Burma finally secured their independence. In Egypt, local resentment was boiling over. Citizens placed the blame squarely on their ruler, King Farouk. They held him responsible for recent military defeats against Israel and were furious that he continued to allow British soldiers to occupy Egyptian soil, specifically in the Canal Zone. That frustration soon escalated into direct violence. The local population began targeting British civilians and military personnel. Riots, arson, and guerrilla gun battles erupted throughout the Canal Zone, forcing the British military to impose martial law just to maintain order. By 1952, a group of nationalist army leaders known as the Free Officers Movement decided they had seen enough. They orchestrated a military coup, forcing King Farouk into exile and declaring Egypt a republic. At the helm was Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser, a charismatic leader determined to strip all foreign influence from his country. Nasser was building a modernized, fiercely independent Arab state. Meanwhile, the political class in London still believed they possessed the authority to dictate terms to the rest of the world. A collision between the two was inevitable. To understand how this local dispute exploded into an international crisis, we must look at the broader geopolitical map of the 1950s. The world was now locked in the Cold War, violently divided between the capitalist West and the communist East. As the largest and most powerful Arab state, Egypt was a highly coveted prize. Both the United States and the Soviet Union wanted Nasser in their camp, kicking off an aggressive diplomatic race to secure his loyalty and limit the other's reach. The Western allies made the first major play. The US and Britain offered to fund the centerpiece of Nasser's economic modernization plan, the construction of the massive Aswan Dam. But tensions on the Israeli border were rising, culminating in a raid killing 38 Egyptian soldiers. Desperate to modernize his military, Nasser turned directly to the Soviet bloc. He signed a massive deal for modern tanks and aircraft from communist Czechoslovakia and followed it up by establishing diplomatic relations with communist China. For U.S. President Dwight D.
Eisenhower, Nasser's willing manipulation of Cold War rivals was an unacceptable headache. In response, the United States abruptly withdrew its offer to fund the Aswan Dam. They intended to pressure Nasser, but instead, they lit the fuse for a global crisis. On July 26, 1956, Nasser delivered his retaliation. He announced to a stunned international community that Egypt would nationalize the Suez Canal Company. He would buy out the foreign shareholders at fair market prices and use the lucrative canal profits to fund the Aswan Dam himself. This data visualization maps exactly why London panicked. By the mid-1950s, roughly half of all the oil required to keep the British economy and Western Europe running flowed directly through this narrow shipping lane. As the British Prime Minister put it, Nasser now had his thumb on their windpipe. That Prime Minister was Sir Anthony Eden. Eden had built his political reputation in the 1930s, opposing the appeasement of fascist dictators. Now suffering from poor health, he viewed Nasser through that exact same lens.
He convinced himself the Egyptian president was another Hitler or Mussolini who had to be met with immediate force. Across the Channel, French Prime Minister Guy Millet completely shared that hostility. France was currently fighting a brutal war to hold on to its colony in Algeria, and Nasser was actively training and supplying the Algerian nationalist rebels. Millet wanted the Egyptian leader removed just as badly as Eden did. Driven by their overlapping interests, Britain and France began secretly drafting plans for a full-scale military invasion to seize the Canal and depose Nasser. Blinded by the memory of their imperial past, neither government recognized they no longer possessed the economic or military independence to execute such a campaign. Throughout that summer, the international community scrambled for a peaceful resolution. At a conference at Lancaster House in London, 18 nations formally supported a proposal to return the canal to international ownership. Nasser flatly rejected the idea. The American position was clear. U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles explicitly warned the British government that launching a military strike against Egypt would alienate the Middle East and push the entire Arab world directly into the arms of the Soviet Union. President Eisenhower was in the middle of a re-election campaign and had absolutely no appetite for a Middle Eastern conflict. If London and Paris chose to pull the trigger on an invasion, they would be marching into combat completely cut off from American diplomatic and financial support. Eden and Millet chose to ignore the warnings. Clinging to the illusion that they could still dictate global affairs by force, British and French troops deployed for an assault on Egypt. They expected a quick, decisive colonial victory. Instead, their invasion triggered immediate global condemnation. Faced with severe economic threats from Washington and nuclear threats from Moscow, Britain and France were forced into a rapid, humiliating military withdrawal. The operation achieved the exact opposite of its intent. It exposed the absolute limits of European military capability, while clearly demonstrating that global power now rested exclusively in the hands of the United States and the Soviet Union. The fallout from 1956 stripped away the last remaining pretenses of the old world. The Suez Crisis proved that the era of European empire was definitively over, forcefully replaced by the rigid two-power hierarchy of the Cold War.